Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is part of the USTA's recognition of Black History Month. We're going to have a panel discussion with four very accomplished individuals, four people that I have a tremendous amount of respect for. My name is Martin Blackman. I'm the General Manager of Player and Coach Development. I'm talking to you today from Orlando, Florida. We are so fortunate to have Ann Koger with us here today. Ann's a legend. She started playing tennis as a little girl in the late 50s. She had an amazing collegiate career, and she was a pioneer in the Virginia Slims Tour before moving on to become one of our top college coaches in this country. And it's really an honor and a pleasure to have you on the panel today, and I look forward to hearing from you. We've got national coach Jon Glover with us. John's got a great story. He'll talk more about that. We have Holcomb-Jones from the USTA Foundation. PD works closely with the foundation on a number of initiatives. And we also have national coach Jamea Jackson on the call, formerly 45 in the world, and just a great national coach and a great person. So let's have some fun. Want to get started with a question about how we all started playing tennis. I'm going to go first. I'm not going to be doing a lot of talking, but I do want to go first on this one. My first experience with tennis was in 1975. 1975, I remember listening to the Wimbledon final on the radio with my folks. We weren't able to get it on TV that day, and listening to the broadcast of Arthur beating Jimmy Connors. And that really was the first time, and we were just so pumped. My parents played a little bit, but after that, we just felt really inspired, and we felt like it was a game that we could all have fun together playing. Ann, I'm going to go to you. How did you start playing, and why do you think you started playing tennis?
Well, my mother was looking for a activity that I have two other sisters, all of us could do. And because we were kind of very active kids, to say the least. So a neighbor suggested, and she was a pretty good athlete herself, that we come out to Druid Hill Park in Baltimore, Maryland, where I grew up, and try tennis. And so we could walk to the park from where we lived and walk back home. So she didn't have to, have a ride or even take a bus.
Great.
And so she started playing. Well, he kind of met for her, and then usually they would take care of the kids after that. So of course in the park was the zoo, and it was a playground, and it was all kinds of places you could go in the park. So we didn't mind not starting out. But then the Baltimore Tennis Club had a junior development program, and Rip Williams, he was one of the coordinators, and Mr. Hobson. And so they got basically the children of the members to start playing tennis.
Beautiful. Got it.
Yeah. So that's, and we started out, I don't think they had a real idea of what to really do except to do what they do. So, and that's what we did.
That's great. That's great. Okay. I'm going to come back. Thanks for that. Thank you. I'm gonna connect the dots here, Ann, and go to Jamea next, because you and Althea and Zena and Lori and Venus and Serena, you've all paved the path that I'm sure Jamea appreciates as a WTA player who's has some great success as well. So how about you, Jamea?
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely here for all of Ann's stories. Like, yeah. Totally. So, but yes, I started, my parents played. My parents were, they got into tennis kind of in the 70s, around the whole Arthur Ashe time. My dad played football, and he actually started playing tennis as a way to rehab his shoulder. So from when I was a little kid, I was always just kind of hanging around the courts with them. And then my older brother, started to play. This was at Burdett Tennis Center in Atlanta, Georgia. He started to play. So all three of them played. And I wanted to do, exactly what my big brother was doing. So it wasn't long after that I convinced my parents. They did not want me to play because I was already in a few different sports, and it was a lot of driving in the Atlanta area to get people in different places. But I convinced them to let me start, and I never stopped.
We're glad you did.
Yes, indeed.
Thanks, Jamea. And Sean, how about you? How'd you get started?
Yeah, I actually started playing tennis in Schenectady, New York at an NJTL that still is in existence, 40 Love. And I just went to a camp with a bunch of my cousins, and they hit the balls over the fence like it was a baseball, and I kind of focused on form. So it ended up being, a sport for me that worked out. I think I eventually moved to Baltimore County. Well, I moved to Columbia, Maryland, but I took tennis lessons in Baltimore County. And I think the funny story is I played in clinics with my mom, but I looked over to the next court, and the number one in the Mid-Atlantic at the time, Madretti Skinner, and Leslie Harvey and Elizabeth Harvey were number one in 18s and 16s. They were playing next to me. And I said, Mom, I don't want to play in this adult clinic with you anymore. I want to play with them. So, I was then coached by Jon Skinner, and that really kind of boosted my career. So that's definitely how I started playing tennis and got better.
Thanks, Sean. And you mentioned NJTL. Can you tell the listeners what NJTL stands for?
Absolutely. It originally stood for the National Junior Tennis League, but and as it was changed and rebranded, it now stands for National Junior Tennis and Learning, where we build chapters that incorporate tennis and education to change lives. So we're super excited there's about almost 300 NJTLs nationwide. So I know we'll dig a little bit deeper into.
Yeah, we will. That's right.
As we go further in this discussion.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you. And Coach Glover, tell us a little bit about how you got started.
Yeah, I got started playing tennis. It was really kind of an accident. My brother and I, we would, always walk around, different parks and such. And I was always looking to play basketball, but I was a little guy. I was too little to get on the basketball court. I thought I was, good enough to get on there with the older kids, but they didn't want any part of it.
I've seen your jump shot, John.
So there was a tennis court, and there's a older gentleman that would always, try to get kids to play tennis. And, if I couldn't get on the basketball court, it's like, all right, I'll play some tennis. I'll settle for tennis. And so we started playing, my brother and I, and, my brother actually took more of a liking to it than I did at the time. I played, basketball, baseball, I played everything. But, so then I was getting dragged to tennis courts and tennis programs, the Arthur Astor in Philadelphia, Billy Johnson program in Philadelphia, who Ann knows quite well. And I'm like, well, okay, if I'm along for the ride, I may as well play. And then from there, it started to stick, and I really, started to love the sport, so much so that when I finally started playing tournaments, I actually lost in the first round of the first 14 tournaments I played. And my parents couldn't believe. They're like, why do you want to keep playing this sport? You lose that, like I was the first pick on my basketball team. Baseball is usually the best player in the team, and I kept losing. And I think that's what drew me to it, is because the results was 100% on me, and I got to felt like I got to control the outcome, which in that case was losing. But once I finally won my first match, you would have thought I won Wimbledon, and then I was hooked from there.
That's awesome. That's great. Thanks, John. Thanks.
Yeah.
So we're gonna pivot a little bit. We're gonna get a little bit heavier now. Obviously, the country's been through a lot. A couple summers ago, we saw a lot of things that kind of reinforced the fact that we weren't where we wanted to be in terms of racial unity. And one of the things that I was very proud of a couple of years ago, we did it again last year, was our Be Open campaign that was really focused on diversity and inclusion, and calling out our support for Black Lives Matter. I think a lot of us were proud of that, but obviously there are gaps in where we need to be and where we are. I guess to start the discussion around that, I'd like all of you to share, if you're comfortable with it, share maybe an experience when you first experienced racism in tennis. Obviously in the 60s and the 70s, and when you were coming up, it just wasn't a sport that was accessible for us. So share a little bit about that maybe, and how you dealt with it. And we'll go in the same order, and I'll start with you.
Okay. My first experience was in a USTA sanctioned tournament. I was 11 years old, and that was my first local tournament, sponsored by the News American newspaper, which no longer exists. But the emphasis in learning tennis, they always emphasize, calling fair lines and being a good sport,
Sure.
and things of that nature. And you were called on it if they saw that you weren't. So I got on the court with this player who was, I guess, well established. I had no ranking or anything. And every time I would hit the ball, Baltimore used to have tons of red clay courts.
Okay.
And on red clay courts, your lines are chalked. So if the ball hits the line, it, sort of the chalk goes up. Well, she kept calling these balls out, and I was battling. It was hot and everything. So here we are with match point. I hit the ball, the chalk flies up. She comes to the net. I said, well, that was good. She said, it was out. I said, no, it was good. The chalk went up. I said, it was good. So she came up to the net, and we were supposed to shake hands. So I shook her hand, and I was so angry. I went up to the desk. I told the lady, I said, I lost, and I'm mad because she cheated me like that. So my mother would come to the tournaments. I went to a tree, sat down away from everybody. I cried like I don't know what. So, I was so angry. I tend to cry when I get angry. And so after that, there's a lot of players around the court. So I kind of walked back over to her, and I said, you know what, you beat me. I said, but I'm coming back. I'm going to keep coming back till I beat you. I'm going to find you in a tournament, and I'm going to beat you. And that's determination, so I knew I had to get better so I could hit the ball so they weren't so close to the line. So in case I ran into people like that, I was having a clear shot. So that was my determination. But I also realized that sportsmanship was important.
Yeah.
Because if you get on the court and lose your mind and get hung up into some things that cloud your mind so you can't play well. So that's what I learned from that situation. And I beat her.
And you did you caught her? Caught her
and I beat her. Yes. Badly.
Wow, that speaks to your character, your tenacity. That's amazing. Thanks for sharing. I want to just follow up with one other question. Okay, so that's a junior experience. You said you're 12 years old. As you go through your career, you became one of the first Black women on the Virginia Slims tour. How did you balance your love for the sport? Obviously, you love the sport, you love the experiences, what it represented. How did you balance that with the continuing adversity that racism played when you were going through that journey?
Well, by then, I felt like I was kind of a veteran as far as dealing with people who aren't honest on the court and in sports. And a lot of times we did not have officials or linesmen. A lot of times we had to call our own lines. Most of the time, if you were semifinal finalist, you had a chair umpire.
Sure.
So yes, that happened more often than not. And you can challenge people. I wasn't going to jump over the net or going to the other side, because that wouldn't be appropriate.
Yeah.
But I certainly did let them know that I didn't appreciate their calls. And
Good.
then sometime they would try to reverse it and say, well, you're cheating. I said, well, okay, if I'm cheating, why don't you go get the official and we'll straighten this out,
Right.
you know? And they were like, oh, are you accusing me of cheating? I said, no, not right now, but if you get an official to come out here, we'll see what happens, you know? So it was always a challenge to keep your head in the game.
Right.
and
And
not
never, and
with
not
the-
compromise your standards, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And also it just gave you another level of determination to get better so that you could play the game in such a way that you would make good enough shots so that they couldn't question them. If they
Got
did it, they'd be so obvious that they would have to be embarrassed, I hope. But yeah, it was a continuous thing through college. You know, you run into people that cheat and you also run into racism, you know, because when I played, there was no NCAA for women.
Got it.
And it was called the AIAW, and they only went to regionals. So the Fernbirders got a group of people together to sponsor national championships for collegiate women. So Bonnie and I, representing Morgan, the two-person team, women's team, and we were also on the men's team playing 1 and 2 as well.
Wow.
So we ended up going to those tournaments, and I had this spectator come over and said, my God, you won the match. They call you every serve you had was an ace, and the lady in the chair was calling it out. So he was like, what are you going to do? Are you going to report them? I said, you know what? The match is over. We shook hands. I said, I know it was good. What was I going to do about it? The lady in the chair was making the call.
Right.
I
Right.
said, but certainly I'm going to let them know I did not like that.
Got it.
So,
And I'm going to stop there. We're going to come back
Okay.
to that. But just really appreciate your
Yeah.
tenacity and the fact that you persevered. Yeah. So that we could have some opportunities down the road.
Mhm.
Jamea, I'm going to go to you. Ask you to share a little bit.
Yeah, I'm from the South, so I grew up with the stories, right? Like Ann is telling, and you know, like my mother, she never went to an integrated school from kindergarten all the way through college. So I was raised on these stories. And so when I was 8, I had been playing tennis for about a year. And I went and I visited my mother's family in Tennessee, rural Tennessee.
Mhm.
And she was a maid for a family, and the family had a tennis court there. So I was often able to hit at that court, but I hit with my brother, or we hit on a ball machine there. But there was one week where we couldn't use that court. So I asked my mom to take us to a local club to see if we could hit. And she was very resistant to taking us. And I, again, very persistent, continued to ask until she relented. And when we showed up at the court, we went to the front to get a court, get balls, everything. And the person at the front looked straight at me and then looked at my mom and said, oh, you can't play here. And I was kind of like, what? And my mom was like, getting fired up. And I was like, but Mom, like, why? And that person looks right at me again and they say, your kind can't play here. And this was, the mid 90s. This was 1994 or something like that, so way after the 60s and all the strife and everything. And so we left, and we spent the whole kind of rest of the day. It was a lot of talking and education. And I don't know that I truly understood what happened at that point as an 8-year-old. And my mom actually ended up taking a lot more of an interest in even more Black education for me and my brother, because we had learned it, but it's a different thing to experience it, And so flash forward about 10 years later, that facility was actually hosting a WTA event. And I went, and of course, I played, now I was good enough to play on the courts, and I actually had a fantastic tournament. I lost in the semis, and I think I may have lost in the finals. And I was like adopted by the club and by the city as like a hometown person, because my mom's entire family
Got it. Okay.
town, and so it just really stuck out to me, the difference, from when you become a public figure to when you're just, kind of a faceless, nameless Black kid, how differently you can be treated. And at the end of the day, that is what we can become, any one of us,
Yeah.
So it's something I think I'll remember my entire life. I mean, it's happened, many other times in many other forms, but that's the one that sticks with me. And like Ann said, it became more of a fire lighter
Got it. Yeah.
more
Yeah.
than anything else. And I think I have to credit people around me for helping me frame it as such. And I think it continues to kind of remind me and drive me in what I do today, and how I work with the players that I come in contact with.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that, Jamea. Thank you for sharing that. It makes me think of, we have the privilege, all of us at PD and Sean and the foundation, we have the privilege to be able to bring kids here to Orlando or to Carson or camps throughout the country and tell them, hey, you are welcome. You are welcome. You do belong here. And that's really special. Sean, I'm going to go to you.
Well, this is an interesting question for me. I don't feel like I was relatively insulated, as I mentioned earlier. When I looked over to the court beside me, all of the players I mentioned that were number one in the Mid-Atlantic at the time were all Black. John Skinner was Black. Pernell Harvey was Black. So I was kind of insulated in that way. And I also didn't travel as much as probably a Jamea or a John did. I to be frank, as a player, I wasn't at that level. I was pretty good, but I wasn't a super national world beater. But what I would like to say about this question is that I want to put my policy hat on. I did go to George Washington, and I majored. My master's is in policy.
Okay.
One of the things that we don't talk about enough when we're talking about racism is we tend to talk about anecdotal incidents as racism, but we don't have enough conversations about structural racism that is less blatant or in our face. I think we've come to the point, as Jamea spoke of an incident in the 90s, and Ann spoke about incidents earlier, and I'm sure John has, we've all gone through our incidents, but we have to also combat the structures that don't necessarily allow for Black people, as whether it be coaches, whether it be directors, whether it be C-suite executives within the tennis infrastructure, to be celebrated, to ascend, to be retained. And I think one of the things, as we continue to fight racism, that we need to talk about beyond, anecdotal conversations about direct, blatant, because I feel like at this point in our history, direct, blatant racist name calling or incidents are going to be, in most parts, if they're true, they're going to be punished. And we've gotten to that point, but we haven't necessarily gotten to the point in which we've been able to break down structures around the infrastructure of tennis. And I think that's a discussion to elevate this discussion as we go forward and make meaningful change. I think that's extremely important. And the last thing I'll say in regards to that, one of the things that changed my life was Professor Gregory Squires at George Washington. I had an argument with him in a policy class, and I said, hey, he said, well, what do you do first? Do you change hearts and minds, or do you change policy? And me being a good-hearted young man, I said, well, you change hearts and minds. And he said, no, you change policy first, because everybody's hearts and minds may not change at the rate you want them to, but you put policies of fairness in place to create the desired outcome. And I think that goes the same way with structures and combating structural racism within, the tennis community. So I think that's how I would steer this discussion, this being about incidents that we've endured.
That's a great point, Sean. And we actually will be able to bring it back in the last question, which is going to be more kind of what's working, what's not, talking about systems and structure. But you raise a really great point. Before I get to Jon, you talk about hearts and minds versus policies. One of the things that hit me a couple weeks ago with the Brian Flores incident is you got a really progressive owner in Rooney in Pittsburgh, and the NFL adopts the Rooney rule, which is a great rule. It's very well intentioned. It's the right thing to do. But then you have a situation where a decision is made before Flores gets his interview. So, it's a check the box. Yeah, we interviewed the black candidate, but we made the decision, 2 days ago. So, a very interesting question as it relates to policy versus culture. But thanks for bringing that up. Jon, I got to finish up with you.
Yeah. First off, Sean, that's a great point, and I really appreciate you bringing that up. There was a lot of instances when I was younger of just kind of maybe being left off teams or not being welcome certain places. But I felt like my parents did a really good job of educating me as far as what I would expect playing this sport. Yeah. And as I improved and I got kind of outside of the bubble of some of the programs that I was in, and playing outside the state nationally, that maybe I wouldn't always be as welcome. And my parents kind of always told us that we would have to work twice as hard at times as children of European ancestry to achieve the same things at times, and that just to make it a motivation to outwork your competition. Right. So the one thing that I will say that I remember as being something like poignant, it was actually involved my sister. And, it was our first time, her first national tournament. She was playing in the South it was at a pretty exclusive country club. And she was playing a little girl who was just cheating her left and right, making snickering comments to her as she was, as they were crossing on the changeovers. And, the referee was basically letting her do it and not overruling anything and kind of, helping her win the match. So they win the match, or the little girl beats my sister and comes to the net, and they go to shake hands. And she said, something unrepeatable using, the N-word. I'm not shaking this, his hand. And the referee kind of just went, no, and walked away. And my sister, she was probably 11 or 12. She was just, crying her eyes out. And, my mom had me talk to her, and I told her, what I thought my parents would have told me was, you don't ever let that girl see you cry. You use that as motivation, and you beat that girl's butt the next time you play her. And my sister, this was at clay courts, so then she has a couple months until hard courts. I can remember she drove to hard courts, which was might have been in Georgia. They drove from Philadelphia, and the whole car ride, my sister was basically praying that she would play the little girl in the first round at that tournament. And guess what? She played her in the first round.
And now you got to finish strong now, Jon. Did you get her?
Beat her like 2-2. Played with such fire and passion. And I was never been more proud of her. And that was kind of the attitude that we took towards things. We weren't going to kind of let someone else's opinion or attitude or what have you affect us in any kind of way, and except to make us get better. And that's kind of how our parents raised us. And again, I felt like they did a great job of kind of preparing us for the world out there. And so when these situations arose, we dealt with them in the best possible way.
So thanks for that, Jon. We're going to reverse things a little bit, and we're going to go back to Sean. Sean made some great points about structure and policies, and would love for you to talk a little bit about what's working, what's not working, what some of your recommendations would be. And then we're going to finish up with Ann.
I think one thing, well, I guess it's a shameless plug. I think the excellence program with the USTA Foundation, I think that's working well with introducing players through NJTLs and also working them up through the player pathway. I think the partnership with player development has been invaluable. Getting, multiple players on the player development radar that might not necessarily have been there, but they might have.
Yeah.
But it's been an additional player identification mechanism for our country. And I mean, I think the results speak for themselves. I mean, you look at Robin Montgomery, as the girls singles and doubles champion. You look at Claire V. Gano as the Australian Open doubles champion most recently. And players down the pipeline that are coming that people might not have heard their names quite yet, but they're also coming as the program continues to expand full pathway opportunities. I also think what we're doing in regards with the foundation and with USTAU with working to get more diverse coaches into the game. One of the things that I noticed anecdotally that a lot of players that have remained in the industry, not just as coaches, but as people in more corporate roles like myself, that stay in the game, a lot of times they had Black coaches or they had people that looked like them around them. When I look at my coaches, especially when I moved to Columbia, Maryland, I had Isadora Ifane, I had John Skinner, I had Pernell Harvey, and then I also saw excellence with Black players around me, with 3 of the top in the Mid-Atlantic at the time being in the same clinic with me and, being African-American as well. So I think being able to see people in those positions, what I think we can continue to do better is always hiring and retention at all levels. I'm always going to push that. And you have to have more Black leadership, to be frank. It's very important. People cannot just see themselves in certain roles. They have to see themselves as the general manager of player development. And I think it's great, but there still is another level that we have to see ourselves in. And that when we do interact with players and not just players, but just the outside public as a tennis organization, we see more diversity amongst us at every level. And I think that's one of the most important because kids that play tennis are not all going to end up as pro tour players.
Sure.
Some of them we want to end up as, directors on the ATP tour or directors on the WTA tour or the next CEO of the WTA or any of those organizations, the next CEO of the USTA. These are important things that we have to model within our own organization and the tennis organizations around, from the ITA to the WTA to the USTA, that's what we expect to see in order to attract more people to the sport.
Well said. That's a challenge for all of us at the USTA. Thank you for that. And Jon, I'm going to come to you.
I've done a lot of the foundation programming, helping Sean out from the PD side, and Sean does a phenomenal job. Not only connecting with the kids, but kind of giving them a bigger picture of the world of tennis and helping them understand. I mean, I can remember doing an activation with them at the US Open, and part of Sean's, I think, mission for that activation was having lots of people of color that were in the tennis industry kind of spend time with the kids, talk to the kids that weren't necessarily players or coaches.
Right.
And these can be our next leaders in the sport. And there was a little girl, I can't remember what her name was, but she would, it kind of blew her mind, like, wow, I can still be involved in tennis, even if I'm not a professional player or a coach. And it was eye-opening, and it was great to see that. And I think we definitely need a lot more of that. And then I would also say there's a lot of great, programs around the country in JTL and otherwise that are, getting kids of color into the game and providing opportunities for them. JTCC, College Park, Maryland, Legacy, Philadelphia, Excess Tennis, Kamal Murray's program in Chicago, just to name a few. There's many others. And I think, getting the kids involved in the sport is the first step, and then continuing to be able to give them opportunities As we know, tennis is an extremely expensive sport. And, sometimes, our kids don't have those opportunities to reach their high levels and,
Yeah.
Advance in the sport. And I think the USTA and, some of the NJTL's excellence programs have been able to provide opportunities, but we just need to have more of that. Just from my vantage point, I see a lot of really talented, young female players coming up in the game of color, and there's been some great role models for them. And when I go to the tournaments, there's not as many African American or boys of color.
Yeah.
And we need to find a way to connect with them and let them know what a great game we have and that it is cool. And we've got to find ways to kind of make it cool for them.
And I agree with the we all see it with the camps, and we got so many Black girls in our camps, and that's undoubtedly the Venus Serena effect, no doubt about it. And then we've got Sloan and Madison, but we've got to get more African American boys into the sport. Yeah, thanks for that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jamea, what are your thoughts?
I think what's working is providing these young players with the vision to match their dreams.
Right.
Sean mentioned Robin, and there's Katrina, and I mean, there's so many more young players just playing even than when I played, and they are all dreaming big and working hard. And I'm looking at these young kids at young ages, and I'm like, wow, they're good, like they might be better than we are at that age. I would never tell them that, but yes, because of our experience, and for instance, because of Ann's experience, there were things that she, they told me that I didn't have to learn for myself, and that cut the curve.
Right.
And so I think keeping the players in the game who have already played and passing that vision on, showing them, exposing them at young ages to high levels of the game, and really they run with it, they run with what it's going to take, and they make it their own. I think that has been like really positive with players like Madison, like Sloan, who were full-time in the program for a number of years during
That's right. Yeah.
very formative times in their tennis game. And it's been a pleasure for me to work with Sean. We've worked closely together as well, and we've kind of talked about the benchmarks that these kids need to be hitting at certain moments, and what they need to be exposing themselves to, instead of being big fish in small ponds,
Right.
getting outside their comfort zone and playing the best and really like succeeding. And that, as much as anything, is driving them to push themselves and get better and turn pro, and then that inspires the next generation. So I think that especially from the girls' perspective, that having a pathway,
Right.
for players to make their way onto the tour, I think that's been kind of extraordinary, probably over the last like 10 years, and I mean beyond, it's just maybe become more honed in the last 10, 15 years, between all the players and all the people who came before within our tennis community. I think that's probably something that's working well, that we have to continue to
We got to continue it. Yeah.
yeah.
Have to continue it. Yeah. Well said, Jamea. Well said. We don't want to pat ourselves on the back too much, but Sean talked about the excellence teams and the fact that program is really working. And I'm really proud of the PD structure that we put in place, where we bring those young players together at the base in the camps. And then in the transition space, when things get really expensive, we're able to provide some direct coaching and get them to where they need to be. So I think we're all really proud of that.
Yeah. It's such a hard.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's an incredibly difficult road for sure, like everyone has said. And so it's not easy what those girls, and they did it for sure. Like the individual players are the ones who did the work. For sure. So, but I think that's something that we have to continue to stoke and, and work together within the larger tennis community, not one entity. It's the village, of it. That's really important.
Yeah, it's a partnership, right? It's a partnership with the sections, with the private sector, to keep the base as broad as possible so those kids can see, the vision that you're talking about. So, Ann, I'm gonna finish with you, and really looking forward to just getting your perspective.
Well, a couple different areas. I'm very much a community-based person. I love to see programs get started, bring as many kids in as you can to keep their attention, and then also working with the progression of when the cream starts to come up to the top.
Right.
That's also a challenge. Where do we send them? Because remember, when kids are young and they first come into tennis, the parents, they don't know anything about the sport other than what they see on TV.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have to make it fun. You have to let them know this is inclusive. We want you to shine. And also, these are the other things that tennis can provide for you. So it's a lot of talking and convincing down at the grassroots level. But sometimes what was old is good for what's new. I heard a lot of you talk about the team concept, and I think that is so important with our kids nowadays, that they feel like they're part of something, that they're sharing an experience. And the other thing too is to keep it fun for them.
Yeah.
Like you always don't have to just drill. Sometime when I've had programs, with advanced kids, they take a break. You have a group over here playing Scrabble. I have somebody over there that wants to shoot a few baskets on their break, and then they come back and like, oh, that was great. And they work even harder.
That's right.
Even training. Some of them don't know anything about training, and it's important because they have opened up the theories about you don't put little kids on the weights and you don't do a lot of things that were taboo aren't, because they've done, the scientific part of tennis.
Sure.
And when they get into real training, that's wonderful. And I think some of that needs to be part of the program, a real big part of the program, because of course, what takes you out of the game could be an injury.
Yeah.
That maybe could be avoided. I think it's good that we look at the years in which tennis was in its boom, and why did it boom at that point? Was it just by luck? Was it the policy? I was in the room with the board members of USTA down in the Middle State section, and I led Dwight Mosley, who became a board member. I said, they don't have a affirmative action and they don't have a policy like that. The USTA they didn't even realize that. Once they put that in, everything just like opened up. It was like, oh, we have to like change ourselves, and policy can do that.
Yeah.
Okay, what we was talking about, but definitely, I think, especially to draw these young men back, because they have a lot of different avenues now for young men to spread themselves into sport, and they gonna have a few Venus and Serena type guys running around here doing great things, but that seemed to have captured because they're role models. They see them doing these things. So I think that's part of the sport that we have to look at building to keep the kids engaged, to look to the top, and then also point out things like you can be more, like I heard Jamea say, more than just a tennis player.
Yeah.
You look at TV, you can be a commentator. I think Leslie has a program, Win for Life, where she does a lot of things behind the scenes.
That's right. Great program.
And that's attractive too. They have this in school, people running around with, recording different things, and commentators and what have you, trainers. So I think we have to make it broad-based with the focus of still trying to bring the players through and make champions out of them. And as a college coach, part of the psychological game, I used to say, you're all champions. You're all on a team. We have to think as one. The best one is just as good as the least one, and the least one is just as good as the other. and it's like, really? Because sometimes they don't think like that, but I think that's all of that's important. There's so many things just to keep them engaged.
Yeah.
And to have them set goals or begin to set goals, which they had never done before. And it's up to us as coaches, have more role models, because it starts in the community. If they see somebody that looks like them doing this sport and doing things that surround the sport, you're likely to attract them. And if they're younger people, it convinces the family. I know when I used to have programs in the summer, I would have lessons for family lessons.
Okay.
And the parents are like, what? I said, yeah, you can come and learn too. You'll know what they're talking about around the table. And they couldn't believe it. And they were sold. Now, some of the parents didn't really stay, but their kids did. And just to have that once or twice a week. And they just thought that was just the greatest thing in the world. It was a family thing. And then you sold the family. So those are just,
you hit some really great points there, Ann,
yeah.
around fun. And I love what you said about let's think about what was working in the 70s. 70s, the sport saw a boom that, we've never seen before.
Mhm.
And, what were some of the commonalities there? The training, the role modeling. No, those are great points. Anything you want to end with?
Well, my closing comments is I think this is a great panel. We've covered a lot of areas, and I think that we need to not let this be filed away somewhere, that we pick up and move forward and make some of these things happen. And I think we owe that, for as much as tennis has given us, we owe that back to tennis too.
When I look at you, Ann, and Jamea, and Jon, and Sean, I see 4 people that are great role models and that have taken different pathways, but 4 people that I would love for my 4 children to spend time with, and 4 people that I know inspire a love for the game. And you talked about everyone's a champion. It's about being a champion for life, right? I mean, this game teaches you so much about tenacity and loss and delayed gratification. And we got to make sure that we spread it as widely as we can. Well, a huge thank you to all 4 of you for making the time, and to our listeners, and a special thanks to you, Ann, because we wouldn't be having this conversation if it weren't for you. So thank you.
Well, I love seeing all of this. This is like great. This is invigorating and makes me want to do more. Just keep doing more until it's never done. But you said keep it going to the next level. And I love this. I love this. More of it.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.